Hey friends, here's how you can make yourself damage resistant and make it less likely for you to get hurt. Most people, myself included, eventually encounter some type of injury in their life. This is especially if you're a bit accident prone, but also, interestingly, if you're physically fit and enjoy challenging yourself, because you end up doing more. It's interesting that we talk about injuries like there's some type of exception, but it's probably more uncommon to find someone who hasn't ever been injured, even in a minor way, and especially so if they regularly exercise, because again, you're doing more physical stuff. But while it may not be possible, realistically, to avoid injuries entirely, there are some methods we can use to reduce the likelihood of them happening and reduce the impact they may have. And this is important because some of these injuries heal by themselves, but others, not as much. And it's partially why a lot of longtime fitness enthusiasts have this collection of war stories like, the great shoulder tweak of '99. I was squatting 1,500 pounds before then. If it weren't for my bad back, I could take all of you. Take you out to dinner, I mean. So you can ask people who've worked out for a long time or just had a very physical job like the military or construction or emergency services. And they'll tell you that sometimes, unfortunately, these injuries will have serious, long-lasting effects on both your physical health and your mental health, which is not fun. Now, the good news is that a good physical therapist, or surgeon if it comes to that, can help you work through a lot of these injuries, but it would be nice to prevent them from happening in the first place, right? So if you do even a few things from this video and it helps you avoid an injury in the future, I'll consider that a win. And adding these changes to my workouts and routine have not only helped me reduce future injury, but also improve quality of life. Okay, so this first part, I'll give an overall concept of why we're doing what we do and how to prevent injury. And then next, I'll give some actionable steps. So we have concept and then application. Also, not to brag, but now I have a clear cup so you can see the cup is not empty. Okay, now it's empty. The first point is to scale difficult movements to your ability. You're probably already very familiar with this concept, but there's a twist. Basically, you're just taking a movement or position that you know might hurt you and adjusting it to where it can strengthen you instead. Adjusting it can mean lowering the weight, changing range of motion, or more. And actually, this is really the foundation of progressive overload and fitness in general, and even progress in general in some ways. But while it sounds super obvious, here's why it's very relevant to making yourself damage resistant. Because while we all know this and we agree with it when it's pointed out, it's actually like the opposite of what some of us actually do. Because our inclination sometimes isn't to address weakness, but just to avoid it. Fixing weaknesses is like patching a hole in a castle wall that you're trying to fortify, or fixing your car when the check engine light comes on. Again, we know this is important, but how we actually train in fitness doesn't always reflect this. What we sometimes do is just strengthen what's already strong, like in a deadlift when we're working out. And in life, avoiding potential weaknesses like never squatting below parallel or never going knees over toes. We're stronger up here and more vulnerable down here, so sometimes we just avoid this area and strengthen this area. That's like strengthening the parts of your castle wall that are already strong while avoiding the hole, just hoping nobody goes there. Or just riding a bike to avoid fixing your car, which I admit can be very fun and some would prefer that anyway. And it's not to say that deadlifts, parallel squats, and other heavy movements are bad. In fact, they're very good for the common goals of fitness, which include building muscle and increasing strength. What I'm suggesting is that we spend some time, maybe after our workout, addressing some of our weak spots that we may not have trained as much. Full deep squats are an example that I'll use here since I already mentioned them. You don't have to do these with the same weight as your parallel squats, of course. You don't even have to add weight. But sometimes life may force you into a position of deep knee bend, like we fall or jump off a roof for some reason. So it's good to spend some time preparing for this. If you're not ready or doing this hurts you, then you can assist yourself to the movement to where you feel effort, but not pain. Note that scaling to your ability, as I mentioned before, doesn't always mean reducing weight. It can also mean reducing range of motion until you're ready. An extreme example is how this position may not hurt a contortionist, but it would hurt most people if they haven't built up to that. By the way, you don't necessarily need extreme range of motion like that, and some would even argue against it, so you don't have to build up to that if you don't want to. But if you're having, say, trouble doing the full squat with your heels flat, that can sometimes be due to lack of mobility in your ankles, which you can work through things like elevated calf raises or tibialis raises, which is another example of a weak spot. Something might be weak if it lacks mobility, meaning that if you aren't able to voluntarily and safely get into a position, that position will probably hurt you. So here we have two related examples. A knee that may already have the ability to fully bend like this, but isn't strong enough yet to do a full squat without assistance, so we use assistance to lighten the load. And ankles, which are usually already very strong because they carry around our full body weight, sometimes even on one foot. Like imagine doing a one-arm handstand the same way you would stand on one leg. But ankles may lack mobility to fully harness that strength. So we improve this essentially with weighted stretches, among other things. So to summarize, 1. Think of a weak spot in your body that you may already know about. Knees, back, and wrists are common ones. 2. Look up exercises for these parts. Start with something you can do competently and gradually and safely increase either weight, range of motion, or both depending on the exercise. 3. Rule of thumb, aim to feel effort during these exercises, but not pain. Okay, so we understand the overall concept, which is a subtle mental shift behind not just strengthening our strong parts, but also strengthening the parts of us that are weaker and more vulnerable. And now we can give some actionable tips. And if you do nothing else from this video, I'd work on some small movements, at least some of the time. And by small movements, I mean literally targeting smaller, weaker muscles, joints, and body parts that aren't capable of moving as much force when compared to the primary drivers of things like a bench press, squat, pull-up, even dip. An example of a smaller movement would be a shoulder rotation like this, but it might also apply to straight arm lifting, like so. Generally smaller numbers, smaller weight, small movement. I use dumbbells because I don't have many machines at home. Like, what's my favorite workout machine? The incline plane. Now, it doesn't mean our stronger muscles can't be injured, especially at longer lengths and deeper positions. So those still have weak spots and we still want to train those. But the point of this particular section is to work on small movements, which, because they can't handle much weight, usually represent spots that would get injured when exposed to a lot of force. Okay, another thing you can try is isometrics for stability. Isometrics in this context mean any exercise where you're not moving, like a plank or elbow lever, or a wall sit, even without the wall. The not moving can be by choice, or if you're trying to move something that you can't yet. You can add weight to these exercises if you need to, or you can adjust them to your ability. And in this context, I would sometimes train tensed up, like I'm bracing for impact. And the idea, once again, is that yes, we want to strengthen our weaker, more vulnerable spots, but sometimes life will force us into that, even when we're not ready. And if we can resist being pulled in those spots and stay in a stronger position, we're less likely to be injured. And I think a good example of this is something like a deadlift, or even a squat, because we are moving during these exercises, yes, but the goal usually is to keep our back straight and neutral and keep that isometric. So it's a dynamic exercise with an isometric component, which applies to just about every exercise I can think of, so it's pretty important. And to add context, during a deadlift, we're supposed to resist our back rounding, because rounding is considered a weaker, more vulnerable position. Your muscles are more stretched out back here, more likely for injury. That's the idea. Now, some people do train rounding. It's a little controversial, maybe a topic for a different video. But even during a Jefferson curl with a rounded back, you usually aren't able to lift as much weight as you would during a deadlift. They're two related but separate exercises. The point for this video is that yes, you can strengthen these weak spots, but it's good to have the ability to resist being pulled into them and stay in your stronger spots. More options, more better. And speaking of which, you may notice there are some days where you feel stronger or even more mobile than other days. And on the other hand, there are days where you felt great the day before, but now you feel stiffer and weaker. You may already know this, but warming up before physical activity can not only improve your performance, but decrease your chance of injury. It protects you from injury because your body is more lubricated and ready for load. Feeling and performing better some days is very normal and just about everyone has it, but warming up properly can bring up your baseline, especially on slower days. If you're lubricated, warm, and ready for exercise, then you're less likely to get injured. A quick guideline here is to first do a general warm-up, where you literally warm up your body's shell temperature. Think jumping jacks, running in place, things like that. And then do a specific warm-up, which is a few lighter sets of the exercises you're planning on doing. So if your main exercise is full push-ups, you can warm up with wall push-ups. If you're benching 135, then you can warm up with 45. So while this is important, I didn't put this section at the beginning of the video because I wanted to make the video not just about avoiding injury in workouts, but avoiding injury in life. And unfortunately, we don't always get a chance to warm up before the things that injure us. Plus, I feel like everyone already knows they should warm up. They might not always. And to be fair, not everyone needs the same amount of warm-up. Some people need a lot, some people barely any. And the goal of the previous sections is to increase your resistance to injury even when you're not fully warmed up. However, you may want to warm up before you try this next stuff because higher forces are involved. So far, we've talked about exercises that happen in a controlled motion or no motion at all. But sometimes in life, we have to move or react quickly. This is often when injury happens. And you may know this is because forces increase when things move quickly. May the force be equal to mass times acceleration, right? So we may want to incorporate some power exercises. You don't have to get too fancy. It can be clapping push-ups or jumps done to your ability, or even something like vaults. You can do flips if you want, but obviously not everyone has to. Try to find something where you have to move quickly, but isn't too complicated to perform. Too complicated depends on the person, of course. And once again, all of this is based off very simple concepts. We're not doing rocket surgery over here. If your max with one body part is, say, 50 pounds, and we exceed that, that's when injury happens. And while that may sound obvious, let's say we're gonna throw something like a baseball or a rock, and the forces we use to whip it through the air exceed our capacity to slow it down or handle it, then injury happens, which is no bueno. And that's Spanish for ain't no fun. But a less obvious, but perhaps more common example could happen during something like one-leg squats, where you might be able to easily handle the up and down forces. But let's say you're tired one day and you shake a little bit and you have to catch your balance. And that fast rebalance counts as sudden movement. And if it exceeds your back's ability to handle that at that moment, then injury might also happen. This can happen if your back is stiff, untrained, or even sore, which has totally happened to me before. My back was sore from other exercises, but I was doing squats and I suddenly lost my balance just for a moment, and that sudden movement, boy, it hurt. which is why I bring it up. But if you're new to fitness, unconditioned, or haven't exercised in a while, then you don't have to incorporate power exercises right away. You can start with the other exercises first, and they will still strengthen you, protect you from injury, and prepare you for this, whenever you're ready. And by the way, just about everything I just mentioned can at least be partially mitigated by an intelligent, full-body training routine that's balanced. So I originally had a long list of notes for this section, but I looked at it, and this is really the summary, and it's the easiest to understand. If you're very good at pushing, you want to train pulling at least some of the time. That's pretty much it. And to use our previous example, if you want to train to have a powerful throw and internally rotate, there's a lot of stuff going on, but internal rotation, then you want to at least be able to decelerate and externally rotate. Now, I don't personally know that we need to have an exact perfect structural balance, like matching 50 push-ups to 15 pull-ups, or benching 315 if you can externally rotate 40 pounds, or something like that. It makes sense that different individuals specialize in different things, so we're going to have different ratios in what we're good at. Some people have very powerful legs, not as strong upper bodies. Some people have the exact opposite. Gymnasts are a good example. But in general, we just want to try to have some balance in our opposing and surrounding musculature. So to use pushing examples, bench press and push-ups, we may want to train our rotator cuff and pulling motions. This is one of the first things I had to solve early on in my fitness journey because my training routine used to just be 500 push-ups a day over about 5 or 6 sets. Eventually, as I learned, studied, and practiced, I came up with a more balanced fitness routine, and that really was a game changer for my health and fitness. And if you want to see that routine, I put it on our website at hybridcalisthenics.com/routine. It is free to use and helps you get healthy, fit, and strong right from home. I think it's raining, so I might have to move. I'm waterproof, but my camera is not. Okay, I think we'll put the camera under this. Okay, next I want to give some thoughts on sleep and rest. During this video, I'm trying to give stuff that isn't the obvious thing that everyone knows. Most people probably already know that sleep and rest is important to avoid injury. You want to make sure you're fully recovered before you attempt your next big thing. If you're not sleeping well, healing well, resting well, you're more likely to get injured. I feel like everyone knows that to some degree, so I want to share something that people may not consider, which is if you're doing multiple sets throughout the day, that's usually when I injure myself in the sense of extra soreness and the damage that's incurred from exercise. So I used to do one-arm push-ups, and there was a time when I was trying to build a very early version of Hybrid, which is a blog, before I started the YouTube channel. I would do one-arm push-ups when I'm taking a break, and sometimes a few hours would go by until I get my next break. So I would do some, like, that was a decent workout, but I want to do 2 or 3 more sets. And then after that 4-hour break, after I've exercised, warmed up and exercised, and my muscles start to stiffen again, I would start, and this has happened multiple times, I would audibly hear a slight ripping sound in my muscles. Not anywhere to the point of like muscle tears or extreme danger, just like slight, soft sounds of tearing. I'm like, and the next day I was very sore. And while that is anecdotal, the lesson I want to give from that is that if you are injured or tired, or just not fully recovered in some capacity, you may want to spend some extra time re-warming up and just making sure everything's moving the way it should. Especially if you're already very sore and very injured, because you don't want to have a big injury set you back. Just about everyone has soreness here and there, but major injuries will set you back for months or even years sometimes, unfortunately. And a lot of us are very dedicated, and sometimes we're still sick or still injured a little bit, and we want to get back into training. And because we go back too soon and not properly prepare, we end up injured more because we injure ourselves while we were still healing from an injury, and that delays much more. Training hard is good, but try to be intelligent about your recovery. Is what I got. And I just want to talk about ego real quick, and to expand upon that, mindset. And this is something that people talk about a lot, like ego lifting being a reason people get injured in training. And yes, I do think that's an issue. I don't talk about it as often as some people do because, first of all, I think some things get mislabeled as ego lifting when someone's just trying to push themselves. I do agree we should be safe, thoughtful, and methodical with the weights we use and the exercises we use. But sometimes when we're pushing ourselves, we may not have the cleanest form yet. We may be trying a new exercise that we aren't as smooth in. And there are things like partial repetitions, which are used in weightlifting and calisthenics and is a legitimate training technique and an actual progression that sometimes gets mislabeled as ego lifting. So that's one reason. And the second reason is, once again, I feel like most people know not to try to lift something that they know that they can't lift, especially since a lot of us are training at home. No one can really see us either. So sometimes we push ourselves, but most of us know not to let ego get in the way of our safety. So in this section, I don't want to necessarily talk about ego, but a shift in our training environment. Because while this shift can be good, I do feel like injury is more likely to occur then if we're not familiar with this environment. So if you're used to training by yourself and you're used to being at home, when I train, I actually don't even listen to music, which some people have called psychopathic, but I just want to focus. It's like meditation for me. And I'm usually very focused on the movement, and what I want to do next. And if you're like me and you get shifted into an environment where you're training with other people, which I've done before, and they're testing you or asking if you can do this, or you're trying a new exercise that they like to do that you're not familiar with, that is sometimes when injury happens, because you're not practiced with it and you're not focused, and you're by definition trying something new. Let's say you only do back squats and your friend's like, oh yeah, front squats really exploded my quads. And you're like, gee, that sounds great. I also want my quads to explode. And you might be very strong in back squats, but front squats are a slightly different movement pattern. And if you're doing that, you might put on more weight than you realize you should. You might have less stability because you're not practiced in a movement, and that is sometimes when injury occurs. So whether you usually train at home, at the gym, or with friends, anything that takes you out of the usual, in exercise or beyond, you may just want to be extra careful. Be cautious when trying new things. But trying new things can be good. So the summary of everything we talked about is to help you avoid situations where you're subject to higher forces than you can handle. And you can do that by just avoiding those situations, or you can increase your ability to handle those forces in different positions, etc. And by doing so, you become damage resistant. That's the science behind it, and I also included some personal stories if you like that. If you want, we have a free full body progressive fitness routine on the website. You can get healthy, fit, and strong from home. We have free support from personal trainers. It's a free resource that you can use. Trainers are friends of mine and help our community a lot. If you have questions, feel free to ask there. We have a fitness app called Hybrid Calisthenics if you want to check it out, and a book and ebook if you like books and ebooks. Have a beautiful day.